Okay. Hello and welcome back. I'm so excited that you're back here. And as I said in my Facebook post, I am so sick of winter and snow, rain, cold weather. So I wanted to come up with something that was very spring-like. So tulips say spring to me. So that's what we're going to do in tonight's video, is this easy, quick little tulip painting. But first, if you have a piece of scrap paper around with you, we're going to do just a little bit of work with our paintbrushes for some of the techniques that we're going to need in the painting this evening. So I'm going to use the number 7 round, and you can pick whatever color you'd like to be practicing with. I'm going to try and pick something that's darker so that you can see it. Not necessarily the colors that we're going to use tonight, but a nice dark color that's easy for you to see. So pick whatever color you'd like to practice with. I've just have this nice blue. And what you're going to do is, we're not wetting our paper, so it's just dry paint, or dry paper, wet paintbrush, so wet on dry. And I just want to practice the technique of making your strokes light and thicker. So when you want to have a nice point, you're going to press very lightly, and then as you want that brush stroke to get thicker, you would press down harder and then lift back up. And you see how this pools right here at the bottom? We really like to play with that, or at least I really like to play with that when I'm doing my shading. So I like the fact that I can have a nice thin mark, drag it down as it's getting thicker, and then you have this bottom piece that collects the watercolor. So we're going to do this technique when we're painting our flowers this evening, or the afternoon. I'm not sure when it's just evening for me, I guess. So practice just having a nice strong tip, putting more pressure on the paintbrush, and then lifting that paintbrush back up and letting this pool in the bottom, right? Because our flower is going to be darker in the bottom here. So this is going to be an important technique for us to do this evening. And you'll see a lot of watercolor tattoos, a lot of watercolor tutorials, just showing you how to do that basic brush stroke. So this is something that you can practice with. We're also going to use it when we do our leaves. And you'll get very good at figuring out where that pressure is into what you want it to do. And of course, if it's a really light pressure, you can get a really nice thin line. So that's kind of the stuff that we're going to be using tonight. So you can put that aside, or you can pause and you can keep practicing. I know some people are a little bit worried about their composition when they're doing the watercolors. So you can use a nice light pencil, and I just drew a line here. There's going to be a tulip here, and I'm going to have a tulip over here that's going to bend down. So the stem is going to go around here. So I'm not doing a whole lot of drawing that out. I'm just giving myself an idea of where that composition is going to go. So I started with just a very light, and in order to get those light colors, another really great practice to do is, if you just have whatever color, again, you can use the same one, just painting a line or a square, and see that's the color with quite a bit of water. Then you add some more pigment, and you're going to see what that looks like. And you'll see that the more pigment we add, the darker that color is going to be. And this is another great practicing technique for if you're just starting with watercolors, to try and get that gradation scale and see if you can go along and get at least, I made my students get at least 5 different colors. Right, so you just, and then you can go to just a straight pigment. And you'll see how different that is from where you started with. So that's an excellent activity to practice with if you're just beginning. So we're going to start really light with quite a bit of water, because we're going to do the same kind of technique that I did in my previous sunflower painting, where we're going to layer colors. So the basic shape for our tulip is going to be that exact same practice that we did. So we're going to start really thin, so not very much pressure on the paintbrush, and then we're going to push down harder. And then as we come to the bottom, we're going to start to lift that up. And again, let that pool. Now the color's not really dark because we're using our very first layer of color. So I want you to do that on each side. So again, light, then put some more pressure on it. And as you come to the bottom, just kind of lift and let that flow. And then we'll do just a little petal here. So start light and then push and then bring that back up. And you'll see we have some spaces in here because we're going to do some highlighting. And if you'd like, you can get a really thin petal just out here and blend that in just to get the shape of the tulip that you'd like. So we're going to do that exact same thing with our tulip near the top here. So press light, and then as you push down harder, that's going to get thicker, and we're going to lift that up. So light. This one's going to be a little bit close, I think. Put one down here in the middle. And then I'm going to do this one that's going to be kind of bent over. Now, depending on what you're comfortable with, you can do that exact same technique just by turning, got a little bit of pencil on there, turning this over. If you rotate your paper, that's going to be a little bit easier to do this exact same technique instead of trying to like contortion your hand some way. Oops. So light, and then push that down and let that blend in. Perfect. So we're going to get that layer to dry. And because it's such a nice light layer, it'll dry quite quickly. So, because in the layering technique, the only part is that you need to have each layer drying in between that. Now I have a pretty dark line for that, but I'm not worried because I'm going to, of course, use some black ink at the end, like I usually do. And then that way we'll cover up any of that. Just going to clean this little palette piece out here with just some tissue like that, and so that I can get some green. So I'll put some water down first. Now, the Koi Watercolor Palette has a couple of different greens, but I tend to like to make my own. I think I've said that before. This one's kind of too much of a jewel tone for me. This one's a little bit too bright. So if I mix those together a little bit, and then what I like to do is I like to add just a little bit of red. So you can put some red in a different spot here, because you're just going to bring a little bit of that red over, and that will darken your color up. So we've done that trick before. And I just think that gives it a much nicer, rich green instead of just adding black. Remember, we want to use the complementary color. So I'll start with this one, and I'm just going to do the same technique. I'm going to get a little bit thicker, but we're just putting a nice thin layer down of where our stems are going to be. So they can overlap here. And we're not going to worry about too much of the rest of the stems until we have more of our purple color finished. So we don't have to use the hairdryer to let that dry, because we're going to go back into the petals and not worry. And by the time we've done the petals, the green will be dry. So I'll go back into this light one. Now I used kind of a mid-tone, but I left some white spaces for highlights. So now I'm going to start to bring in a darker purple in this color here. So I'm going to mix a little bit of this kind of like a fuchsia magenta color. And then the opposite color to purple on the color wheel is yellow. So if we add some yellow into our mix, you're going to get a nice darker purple. You can add a little bit of blue too if you like, you know, more of a purplish blue. You could add some blue in there if you'd like. You just have to rinse your brush out each time you're adding. That might have been a little bit too much yellow. A little bit too much yellow, so that's an easy fix. We just go back in and we add a little bit of more purple here. So just have some fun and kind of play around with your color theory, get the colors that you like, right? I think I'll add just a little bit of this darker blue. And I really like mixing the colors because it gives, I think, a much richer color than just going for like a straight blue or a straight purple. So this is going to be our darker shade here, but you can mix around with yours as well. So I'm going to kind of go through and cover up that white piece there, but bring in some darker shades down here. And what I really like about this is that we're layering. So you're getting this color plus this color, and where it's overlapping, you're actually getting a third shade. And I just really like when that happens. So we're using the exact same technique. We're just darkening up some colors. And I think this one, I just want to have one color out here a bit, which I can blend in there. And again, let this water at the bottom just kind of play. You can drag a little bit of it up if you like, just so your tulips aren't looking perfect. Because they are going to be darker at the bottom. And then again, I think I will turn this one so it's better sight. So start with thin, press down. Let that play a little bit. Leave a little bit of white. I can also go back in with my gel pen that I usually do. And you can just keep adding the layers until you're happy with how dark it is, where your shadows are playing. Just add a little bit more blue to this. Get a really nice bluey. And hopefully you can see the palette. I keep moving it away from you. Okay, and I'm just letting that pool in the bottom. Okay, so now I want to add another layer to my green. As I said, I got a couple of different greens here. And I just think mixing them all together gives you so much more of a richer color. This one's going to be pretty dark. So that's a really beautiful dark green. So I might add a little bit more water just at first to lighten it up. And then I can always go back in. So I'm going to do a little bit of leaves under here, just little connections here. And then just put the dark one on. You'll see that it's just coming down on the one side. And you can decide later which stem is going to come over top of the other one. That's completely up to you. can abstract it a little bit too. Okay, I like that. Might just drop in, just because this is already wet, you can just easily drop in and let that color play in the bottom here to use some dark areas. If you're worried about it bleeding into your yellow, just got a little bit in there, you could dry that petals off before you go in and do this. But it's up to you, right? So there's our stems, and so now I would like to put in some leaves, and I'm going to use the same green because I'm just really enjoying it and we spent a lot of time making it. So let's go up, and it's going to be that exact same technique where we're going to start off very light touch, then you're going to get really thick, and these leaves are up so they kind of go thin at the top. This one didn't carry enough water, so I just have to go over it again. Which is easily done because I do have that outline ready. So this makes just really a beautiful leaf for you, so you don't have to compositionally. I always like to have some coming out. I can thicken this one up a bit too and bring it off the page. You always want to have your eye have a place where it can enter the painting. Then you want your eye to travel around the painting and come back in. So you can see this one's kind of bringing us in, up, and around. That's where the composition is coming from. This is actually a much darker green than I had in the sample, but I don't think I ever paint the same painting exactly the same each time. I think that's very hard for me. So I will add just maybe some of this lighter green just to perk up some of this because it got awfully dark, and this is supposed to be our spring. Our spring colors, we need brightness and fun. So I'll just add some of that in there. Okay, so I'm going to dry that next. So this one leaf I think is a little bit too dark for me. So I'm just going to take some of that lighter green and just add some highlights here. So this is like just a light color wash where you have quite a bit of water in it and you're just washing it over the whole thing. It just changes the color underneath, right? Just like that, okay? Now for our background, our first step is going to be the wet on wet technique, which means we want to have some water. And we're going to use a background that has yellow because that's the opposite color for purple, so it'll have the biggest, nicest contrast. So again, I don't think I have a dirty water that you can actually see where I'm putting it, but I'm not going right up to the leaf. I did dry the leaf. Right, so I'm not going to go right up to it because I don't want this color to bleed into my leaf at all. Then I'm going to start to drop some water in the background here. And I love the wet on wet technique because it really just lets the paints move for you. And you can put some straight pigment in as well. So I always like to have it darker around the image and lighter out, and then darker back in the corners again. So this, we can wet this whole section here. So you just kind of do it in sections, right? And the color, the yellow, white, the yellow wet on wet technique is only going to go where you are putting this wet water. So if you stay away from the leaves, it's not going to go on those leaves at all. It's just going to flow. Like I could turn this paper upside down and it would still just stay in this area. So I'm going to get a little bit darker in this corner up here. But you can do that. You can play with the background, and I like the wet on wet technique. It's hard for people who are perfectionists because it can be a little bit harder to control, but once you practice with it and you understand how it's going to play and you actually just let that happen, that's when it starts to become really fun and not nerve-wracking. For some people, they just find that kind of nerve-wracking to have that just have a mind of its own when you're trying to paint. And again, remember, I don't paint or don't tape my paintings down so that I can rotate them. You'll see I'm just kind of keeping some of that yellow in my backwater just so you can kind of see, hopefully, where I'm dropping the wet. You can go into the tops here, in between the leaves. Just trying to get a little bit darker right around the image. I just think, for me personally, it just brings a little bit of focus into whatever the main focal point of your painting is. So our main focal point isn't the background in this piece, it's the tulips themselves. So I find having a nice dark bright right next to them just makes the tulips shine a little bit more. And the fact that you're using a complementary color, well, that's just going to make it pop out even more so. And I do like to go back in and bring in the colors just a little bit darker in the corners. But you'll see I have all this area in here that's just nice and light. Just a very abstract kind of an idea for the background. And if you ever get an area that you're like, oh, that's too much yellow or that's too much paint right there, you can just dry off your paintbrush and go back in and pick it up. You can also use some paper towel or some tissue and, go back in and grab that out if it's a little bit too dark, because you want to have, a contrast in light and dark in your background. So you can kind of pull that back out and pull in more water. Okay, so I'll just go back in here. I'm just hoping I'm not rotating this picture too much and taking it out of the camera shot for you. That would not be helpful. So just get some water in here so that I can drop this color in. So again, it's not about having to make sure you have all the different yellows. Just use the yellow that you have. Use the paints that you have right now. Okay. And then you can go back and just add some wherever you think it needs to be darker. While it's still wet, it's pretty easy to add pigments to it. Okay, so I'm going to dry this layer off. I'm getting a little bit of lift on, or wrinkling of the paper, so I'm going to turn this over, just paint that X that's behind here to help straighten out my papers. When it dries, it'll pull that nice and tight for us. So my other favorite thing to do, I'm sure you've noticed, is to splat some water on there. And I'm going to use a nice bright purpley pink color. So this is something that you need to have the background dry in order to do this, and you really need to have it be pigment heavy. So I'm just kind of mixing my own color by combining some of the purple with this magenta. I want it to be in the same color family as our tulips, but also kind of be like a different color. So I can just use my pencil this time. And of course, dry that. So we are done with our watercolors now for this piece, and we're going to add our ink. I'll clean that off later. Once again, my favorite pen is just this Optiflow from Staples, not overly expensive. And we're going to just start to do some squiggles under here, squiggle out some fun lines for your tulips. You'll notice that I'm not really actually adding them around the whole piece. I don't really want to frame them necessarily, but I do want to just, I think this adds just a pop of color. And some definition into our tulips here. Okay, and I think I've got lots of room over here, so I think I'll do my signature up here. Good. You can also bring in the white gel pens too, depending on what color you have. This kind of scribbling design is adds an element that I also really love. So you can add some of these scribbles in here. I don't know if you can see that very well though, so this isn't a dark enough color. You can add some of that in there too. Okay, and then we just peel our tape away. And I did this in the same format I've been doing lately. I don't know why, these little Polaroid sized paintings. I have them hanging on a clothesline, kind of an idea in my studio here. And then I'm just going to trim it down to that size. And then if there's any of the pencil marks left, I can erase those. There. And there we go. It's all finished. Again, thank you. Make sure you leave comments if there's anything else that you want to learn about, or hit subscribe so that you can watch the next video in about a week or so. And I hope you're all staying safe and you enjoyed the lesson. Thank you.